You're listening to the Dead Padawan Society, a science fiction and fantasy podcast celebrating the ideas, mythologies, and truths in iconic works of sci-fi. I'm your host, Nick Dennis, joined by my friend, Brett Inman.
Hey!
How's it going, Brett?
I am doing dandy. How are you doing, Nick?
I'm doing well.
I just
Hello,
use the word
listeners.
dandy like we're in the late 1800s.
Like you're a dandy.
Yes. Hey there.
Throw on your transatlantic.
Let's jump into the Model T and drive around, kiddos.
It's the age of tomorrow. Which happens in... There's that in the Iron Giant.
Oh, that's very
the
true.
old transatlantic.
Dude, we haven't told them what the episode's about yet.
Oh yeah, this episode's going to be about the Iron Giant.
Now you just ruined the surprise.
It's in the title.
It's the
I've
description.
seen it.
Yeah, you guys know.
Yeah, this one's a throwback.
Yeah,
because we're going back in time to look at sci-fi that's set in the past, which is its own kind of.
Is it sci-fi
section.
though?
Oh, it is absolutely.
Whatever you say, Nick.
Okay.
You say.
We'll get into that later.
We'll definitely be talking about that. So, tell me, Nick, what is your latest obsession?
I just got Avengers: Infinity War on
Ooh.
Blu-ray. It has been out.
How many times have you watched it?
I saw it
7.
4 times in theaters, 3 or 4 times when it was in theaters, and so just got it this week, and we watched it. My wife and I watched it. So good. Man, that movie's good. But it's about the special features. Like that's
How are the special features?
They're good. I've gone through all of it. I just powered through the thing because they've got a couple of the good ones. They have a director's roundtable that has several directors from the past 10 years of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Get them all around the table. Jon Favreau has done that. Like, have you seen him online on YouTube? He has done that in the past, have gotten different directors and people in Hollywood, actors, and gotten around a table to just talk about the craft.
I haven't checked those out. I'll have to watch that now.
Yeah, type it in, like Jon Favreau Roundtable or something like that on YouTube, and you can find a bunch of them that he's done. And so it's the same idea. And so you have him, Peyton Reed, the Russo brothers, Joss Whedon, and who are the other big ones? Oh, James Gunn and Taika Waititi. So, yeah, Taika Waititi he's not actually there. They roll in this iPad with clothes that look crazy, just like his, on a rack.
That's hilarious.
And he's on an iPad, and it's great.
That's so funny.
But them talking about, it's really cool because it's talking about the world building and how they've taken the characters, and there's a good insight into it. And so that is the good one, and of course the commentary, the full commentary.
Do they, in that roundtable, do they talk about how they marry all of the different works together?
Yeah, they talked about how, is very much in the beginning it was just, telling a lot of the core story of the backgrounds of the characters, and so it's very much the superhero genre, and then they talked about how then Marvel is allowing them to diversify and bring in the different elements, like, the crime thriller, with Winter Soldier and what are some? Oh, the heist with the Ant-Man movies, and different elements like that, comedy, with the Guardians, and then with Thor Ragnarok, and it's really good. That one's really good. It's 30 minutes long. Yeah. So it's hefty. It's not just a 15-minute extra feature.
Was Feige in there?
He was not. They talked about him a lot, about how he was so cool to work with that they could pitch anything and he'd be like, yeah, do it.
Oh, that's awesome.
That he was always up for anything of them trying out anything. And so they had a lot of good things to say about him in it. So, of course, there's deleted scenes and gag reel and stuff like that. I find that I'm not as interested in that anymore. Like I like
deleted scenes can be interesting, but
yeah,
and gag reels,
it's just there.
Yeah,
I mean
I'll watch it once.
Yeah, they're usually like a couple minutes, and they're just fun. But I'm trying to think. Oh, and then there's good behind the scenes things about the battles. So that's good for production. There's a featurette on Wakanda, the battle there, and then there's a feature on Titan, because the other battle with Thanos is there. And so they break down how they did those scenes, which is one is funny because it's just on a sound stage.
Yeah.
And then the other is completely different. It's out in these huge fields in Georgia that they recreated to look like Africa, and then with a ton of CG make the background look like Africa. And it's crazy because they even dug out a channel with a river and all this. They'd put a lot of work into it, and they had to fight the elements because it was raining a bunch. But all that stuff's good, but the commentary is what I hate when I get a Blu-ray and there's no commentary.
Looking at you, J.J. Abrams?
Yes, for The Force Awakens. I still have not bought that 3D version. I would like a commentary, but I wasn't about to fork over for the 3D because I don't have 3D.
I do, so I actually own it if you ever want to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is the commentary good?
It's okay.
If you ever want it. Oh, great. Nah, it's not that great. I hear that it's a lot of JJ going, oh yeah, this guy's great. We worked with him.
They did an awesome job.
Look
at this thing. This person did. They did a great job. That was awesome.
They did the costumes and they're just so great. You know, talking really fast.
Everybody was great. It's true.
Yeah. So I've heard that the Last Jedi commentary is great too. I've listened through the whole thing with Rian Johnson. Yeah. And that's great because hearing him talk about the heavy myth in that film that they were diving into, I love that stuff. Yeah. But they did the same thing in Avengers, talking about each character, how they were weaving in, because they had so many characters to use, and they really they were talking about how this is Thanos' story. Once we figured out that this was going to be a smash and grab heist, and he is the main focus, that it was easy to weave. It was easier to weave the characters in to the different points because it's about him getting the stones and where are they and how can.
That's really interesting. Because
they talked about early on, they had all of these introductions of, what's this character up to? What are they doing? And they have a few of those that are still in the film, but a lot of it was they brought them in when necessary, when the plot demanded that they show up. And it's really good. I mean, they explain it a lot better and break down the scenes. It's the Russo brothers and the two screenwriters. So it's all four of them together.
Oh, that's great. That'd be a good group, I would think.
Yeah, I do like when they have on a commentary where you have a few different people because they can pick up on each other, and
as long as it's the right people,
right? If it's not just
that's a group that would really be focused on the story and those types of elements. There's sometimes whenever you get a commentary and it's all like the technical people, and that's a very different commentary. Still can be interesting, but
they do a good balance of they'll get into the nitty gritty on like an effect or something, but a lot of it is story focused, and I like when a commentary is a story focused. But then they also joke around, like they joke around a lot about Thanos' chin on there, and it comes back around a few times, and it's pretty funny. Yeah.
I've actually noticed. So we have a 1-year-old. And whenever he upgraded from the baby carrier to the car seat, he looks like Thanos when he's in it. Like if he were purple, his demeanor is very, like, he'll laugh at things occasionally, but he tends to be very
stoic.
Very stoic. And so you set him in there, and I'm gonna do a visual gag for our podcast, so our audience is gonna completely miss that. But his little arms will be on the armrests, and his face is just like this kind of scowl, and he's sort of like looking past his brows at you.
So he's like in the Thanos throne chair.
It is little baby Thanos. I've actually thought about doing that for Halloween.
There you go. Just paint him purple and draw
some
lines on his chin.
Yeah. Yep. So.
Yeah. Give him a little knit. Get somebody to knit you a glove.
Oh, that would be good. See, I was wondering what I would do for the Infinity Gauntlet.
Keep it cute with the kids, so it's a knit glove, and then just those stones you can buy at a craft store.
Yeah, some rhinestones.
Yeah, hot glue those suckers on. That would be awesome.
They're just a mitten. It should not even be a real glove. It should just be a little mitten.
Don't let him close his fist. Yeah. So
well, I actually, and this is the second episode that I'll be gushing about a board game, but I was introduced about a month ago to a board game called Memoir 44.
Okay.
It is set in World War II, and I've played it now a couple of times and really, really love the way the game works. So you the board is a grid of hexes, and you have units, either infantry, tanks, or artillery, and you have an objective, and it's always tied to an actual battle. So one of the maps is, one side is beach and the other side is like the bluffs and cliffs. And so one person will play as the American or Allied forces. There are some other units that have been added, so British troops could be used. And then the other side plays as the Axis, so Germans, or as the Japanese. I actually played a Pacific theater game just yesterday with a friend of mine, and initially the game was really frustrating to me because it's very limiting. You've got a card management component to it where you have a set number of cards that determine the actions that you can play, and most of them, your action is limited to 1/3 of the board. So you can move from the center, from the right flank, or from the left flank. And so as you're playing those cards, you might run out of cards on one flank, which means all of your forces that are over there are stuck until you can cycle through and get more cards in your hand. And
so it's balancing the field, making sure you're not leaving one or doing too much on another.
Yeah. Or you might at the very beginning of the game get exclusively one flank, and so you end up you get forced into that channel. And then the combat is all based on die rolls, so there's a certain amount of, as you get closer to an enemy, you get more dice that you roll, so you're taking shots that are closer, so the chance that you're going to shoot something is greater. But there's a lot of randomness to the game, but it really adds to the sense that there is some hopefulness. So even at the beginning of the game, if it seems like the other side has more forces than you have, you might still be able to win the game if you hold the right pieces of ground. Some of the terrain has different rules, so if you're in a wooded area, then that detracts from the number of dice that somebody can roll against you. Things like that. So it's a really interesting, the balance of the game is really, really, really interesting, and the imbalance, really, that you start out with, in some cases the Allied forces maybe have an advantage and the Axis forces are at a disadvantage, or vice versa. Or one side might have a bunch of tanks and the other side doesn't, or just has artillery. And so you're trying to figure out and work towards your objective, which is based on a real historical battle. You've got to get up the beach. You've got to get yesterday the game we played. And we actually, my friend and I played both sides. So we were playing Pacific Theater. It was an advance of the Japanese against an Allied American line.
Okay.
And so the Americans had less forces but had some artillery, and the Japanese had a lot of forces, and the goal was to try to break through the American line. And if the Japanese could get to the back tiles of the board, then it was like they had broken through, and they exit, and you get a point for exiting, breaking through and getting clear. So
if the Japanese are at sea, who's on land?
Well, that one was the coast was actually to one side of the board, so it was as if the American forces had already landed and had fortified their position, and the Japanese were trying to break through that. So
I see.
So it was really fun, and it's super chat. So I the first game that we played on that one, I played as the Americans and demolished the Japanese forces, because again the Americans start dug in,
right.
And so if you just play yourself right, and he would advance like one unit of infantry forward, and I would take him down, and then he'd advance another one. And I got really lucky. He did have tanks that he'd brought up, and I was able to take those down very quickly with a card that I happened to have gotten at an opportune time. And so we're having this battle that I swept. and then we turn the tables. And so I am now playing as the Japanese on that same mission.
Mid-game?
No, at the next game, yeah. So
okay.
So I won the first one. Start now as the Japanese, and I saw what the difficulty was and what the challenge was going to be in the first one, and so I tried to adopt a very different strategy where instead of moving quickly, I tried to just get into areas where I could be fortified and then waited for an opportune moment to kind of get in, and I still lost. It's challenging, but it's the kind of challenge that's really, really fun.
That's a cool way to do it, to do the switch, because then what you did before, your opponent could say, oh, hey, that worked pretty well. I could do that with this twist on that. Or I'm going to do something completely different than that because he'll know that that's coming.
Yep.
I've got a game like that. Have you heard of the Star Wars Risk Black Series?
Yeah.
Edition? So it's not the Star Wars Risk that came out 2000s or 90s or something like that. It's the one that
looks like a TIE fighter.
Yeah. Have you played that one?
I own that one because it's amazing.
Isn't it?
Because it's nothing like Risk, but it's a great game.
Right. It's Risk in name only, but it has the three theaters of battle from Return of the Jedi, to where you're playing on Endor, you're playing in space against the Death Star, and then you're playing Throne Room with Vader and Luke and the Emperor.
Yeah.
And that's fun. I have it. I have the Black Series edition,
so
which
the
is
nice
like,
one with the miniatures.
Yes, it's got the miniatures that are cast, and it's really nice. But I don't get to play it with anyone. I've only played it a couple times.
Well, congratulations. You've just found someone who loves to play that game.
Okay.
So anytime you want.
Yes.
Because
now I want to do that because because it's my game, I always get my way, and I'm always the rebels.
Really?
Yeah, because I always want to take down the Death Star. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be that's the other question I had for you on that is, who chooses the Axis?
Well, I will be really honest with you.
Do you play as the Germans?
The very first, yeah, you can play as the Germans. Yeah.
So you're Nazis.
The very first time that I played, I'm pretty sure I was the Nazis, and I joked beforehand that I hope I lose. So it was kind of like this pressure was taken off. I'm like, if I lose this, I'm actually helping history. So everybody wins if I lose. So the pressure was off to win at that point.
Right. That's a weird feeling to be like, oh, I won, and I'm the Nazis taking over Europe.
In the context of the game, you're not committing atrocities immediately before going to battle, so there's kind of a separation there. You're not required to go inter anybody.
So of course, both sides. If I played that game and I was the Allied powers playing against, the whole time I would just be making rude cracks to the other guy, saying, "Oh, how you like those internment camps?
Yeah,
you're just cool with that."
See, the thing is, the Axis player could call you out for Japanese internment camps.
Oh, that's true.
In the United States, history is seldom as black and white as we often want to paint it.
That's true. It'd be fun to have a couple guys who really know their history sit down at that game and watch, and then say, "Hey, play as if you're actually."
Yeah. Well, and goodness, you watch something like Band of Brothers, and it's crazy the amount of. I mean, there was even a certain. I guess in the European theater, it was more nationalist, but referring to the Germans as Krauts and things like. Mm-hmm. Those were slurs.
Right, absolutely.
That's still in the vein of racism.
Right.
So.
Yeah, we need to get together and play that Star Wars Risk edition.
I'm all for it.
Because I love that game.
Oh, it's great. It's fantastic. So you typically have played as the Rebels?
I've never played as the Empire, and I've played as the Rebels, and I've always won.
Wow. Well, I will destroy you.
Do you like have you won as the Empire?
I've won as both sides.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Whoa, okay.
Because homie don't play.
Yeah, I would like to try the Empire side though, because I can tell when I have played, I can tell the frustration that people have of trying to defend, especially on Endor. That's a hard road to defend.
Well, and that really should be the primary objective of the Rebels. Like, that should be your first. Try to get up that track as quickly as you can.
Yeah, that's what I usually what I focus on. Okay, game talk today provided by. We're really getting into the weeds on that.
Hey, we're talking about a sci-fi game. So
that is true.
That, I think, is... I was talking about a World War II game, but you brought us right back on track with that.
For people talking about how Return of the Jedi is such a... there's this idea that it's such a step down from Empire Strikes Back. That third act battle is the greatest. George was the first one to do like the fast cuts between three different battles.
Yeah, and tonally it was really balanced. You're hitting a lot of the same beats on all three at the same time, which was good.
It built the tension on all three at the same time, and they had parallel stories going on.
This is not just a Star Wars podcast, though. This is a sci-fi podcast, and today we're talking about the Iron Giant. Do you have any obsessions that have come up as a result of your looking into the Iron Giant in the last week?
I've gone online and doing research about this and looking into it, and what I found is the internet loves this movie.
Yes, it does.
This movie has a ridiculous cult following online. We've talked about before that we didn't grow up watching this movie. We don't have kind of the...
Have we discussed that?
We talked about that a little bit, that it was... What year did it come out? 99? 99, yeah, late 90s. So, and it was animated. It was kind of after I started leaving animation at that point, and I wasn't as much into kid films anymore.
Yeah, I was a teen at that time.
Yeah, and so I didn't see it when I was a kid. It was years later the first time I saw it. And so there's a lot of people who've grown up and they just really love this movie, and I didn't have that. But it has a crazy following online. People are obsessed with this movie, and rightly so. It's a good movie.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and dive into our discussion today of the Iron Giant. Now, for those of you who maybe are new to our podcast today, we are not a review podcast. What we're doing is very different. We want to look at these works and explore them. So if you've not seen the Iron Giant from this point forward, spoilers can come at any time. So please take a minute or a couple hours, because it's a movie.
Hour and a half. Not that
long. Go check it out, and then you can join in. And as you're listening, be thinking about things that maybe you even want to comment on after the fact. So from this point on, we're going to be discussing the entire film, and we're looking today at the Iron Giant. So the Iron Giant was released in 1999 by Warner Brothers Animation. It's directed by Brad Bird and features some of the voice acting of Jennifer Aniston, Harry Connick Jr., and Christopher McDonald are probably the names that are most well known. In this film, Iron Giant lands on Earth and is befriended by a young boy named Hogarth. And eventually, because of a government agent played by Christopher McDonald, the giant is found out, and the military descend on this little town in Maine and begin attacking the giant, and the giant reveals that it is well stocked and armed to defend itself.
To the teeth.
And in the end, you're left wondering, is this Iron Giant a weapon, or does it have a soul and the ability to choose? And so I think that's going to open up a lot of opportunity for us to discuss today. But first off, Nick, what did you like about the Iron Giant? We've already said now that neither one of us saw it as kids, and we don't have that nostalgia factor. So as an adult approaching this work, what do you think about it?
It's funny because there is a nostalgia factor for kids who grew up watching it, and so they love the story itself and the film as a whole. I like the nostalgia that is in the movie. That's one of the things that I really connected with. The setting, specifically the setting and the characters, are retro and a throwback. And it's when I was looking through materials and I was listening to not a commentary, but different interviews that Brad Bird had given and him talking about the film. They had the story all worked out before they decided on a setting and a time. for it. So they had the idea, he had the idea of what he wanted to do with the film. And then when they were deciding where to place it and when to place it, they decided in this fictional town of Rockwell, Maine in 1957. And the reason he gave for doing that, the story came first in the whole process of working through it, and then they did the setting. And Brad Bird said he chose that time and place because it fit the theme so well of he loved the wholesome values of the time and the paranoia of the time. And he said it fit really well within the story that they were wanting to tell. And I love that idea that they had the story first, and then they're like, well, what would be a great place to set this? And it's perfect. The setting it in the 50s, setting it in small town America, having the characters that they have, it fits so well. I said that the place it is Rockwell, which is from Norman Rockwell. Did you know that?
I didn't realize they had named it for that.
They named it, they named the town Rockwell because the animators looked at Rockwell and Americana in order to make the town. And if you look at, the diner, the town, everything, it's very Rockwell Americana.
Feels like a Rockwell painting.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
It could be in that series that he did of freedom from this, freedom of that.
You could totally see Hogarth sitting at the counter with the cop and his bag running away from home.
Yeah.
Like it fits perfectly within that. And I liked that they named it that. But I also like the characters. Like some of them are kind of, they fit kind of tropes and just people of the time. They have the G-Man, they have the beatnik, and then they have the kid who's a bit of a bullied nerd. And all three of those characters fit perfectly for that time, but they also fit within what the story is needing perfectly, because you need the antagonist, and so the G-Man fits perfect with that. You need somebody who is bucking, going against authority, and somebody that Hogarth can look to, and that's Dean, which his name is Dean, just like James Dean.
Yeah.
And so that's almost Star Warsian in names there. What the G-Man, what's his name? Kent
Mansley.
Kent Mansley. Yeah. You got Dean, James Dean, the guy who is a bit of a, bro, or not a bro, but like he's kind of seen as like a chauvinist or a I don't know what the word for it is, but he's manly.
Oh, see, I would say he is the man.
Yeah. That's the best way. He thinks he's the man. I
think he's the man in the sense that he is
the man.
Yeah, he is.
Like stick it to the man.
Yes.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah, and so even their names are lining up, and then of course Hogarth. What a horrible name.
Yeah. What a horrible, horrible name. Of course.
They brought that from the book, of course.
They sure did. And that actually, I would say that's one of the things that stood out to me about this work is just the things that I didn't realize went into creating it. And so as a result of watching the film and getting ready for this, I also went back and read The Iron Giant, the book by Ted Hughes, kind of a novella, and was also introduced to Pete Townshend's album, The Iron Man, which was intended to be an adaptation of the Hughes book into a musical.
Wait, you can listen to that?
The Iron Man? Yeah.
No way.
Yeah, he actually released it as an album. There were a lot of...
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he alleges to have created the full musical.
Yeah, and then they decided, we're not going to do that.
They scrapped it. They went a different direction. The songs, so it was in that tradition of not a jukebox musical, but a musical, a pop musical.
Yeah, it was like rock.
Yeah. And so the songs that were poppier or more radio worthy, Townsend still recorded those and released an album kind of in hopes of getting support for moving forward with the musical.
Wait, he released that before the film?
Yeah. Yeah, like a decade before.
What?
Yeah, this is way back. So
Okay, I thought you were telling me he was like,
No.
it didn't get put in the film,
Oh,
so
no.
I'll just release it as an album of, hey, this is what it could have been.
No. So, yeah, the development history of this thing. So the Ted Hughes story was released in the 60s.
Yeah.
And it's very different than the film. And I would say it's even... The film, to me, is kind of a fairy tale, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go on. The story that it's based on is totally a fairy tale. Like it starts out with a robot. So if going back to when we were talking about what sci-fi is, if you're looking at it from just a purely what are the elements that are in it, then yeah, you could probably define it as science fiction because it's got what amounts to a robot. But from that point on, everything the robot's doing is just fantasy. It's, he throws himself off and then rebuilds himself, and then all the villagers decide to bury him, and he comes back from being buried, and then a giant space dragon comes to Earth and wants to consume all life, and the giant is the only one who's able to defend and save humanity from the dragon, which ends up being a space, an actual like a benevolent space being that, in interacting with the in kind of battling with the Iron Giant, ends up like bestowing a song upon the earth that actually brings peace and harmony. So it's totally a work of fantasy. But
that
my
is a
thing
fairy
is,
tale.
it actually for sounding a little like that's a fantasy, that's a fairy tale. It's really well written. Ted Hughes definitely, he actually was the poet laureate in England, and so he definitely earned his stripes. So I haven't read a lot of his other works, but just the language that's used was really great. And so it's interesting to see that. That then gets, evidently, Pete Townsend from The Who had interacted with this story when he was younger. And he had even, this was a cool story, he had envisioned himself whenever he was a kid on his way to school. He went through a rough neighborhood and would get beat up sometimes, and he would imagine that he actually had like an iron suit that would protect him, and so he was the Iron Man. And so that experience from his life kind of married with the story that he got interested in. So he ended up composing all of this music for the intention of making an Iron Giant, Iron Man musical. Again, the album's available, and this was worked on like in the 80s. And then...
Which, side note, that's adorable.
It is, isn't it?
Like, that sounds like a movie itself.
Yeah.
This kid is getting beat up, and he's like, I'll put on this invisible iron suit, and then he grows up and he's a rock star.
Yeah. Oh, it totally is. Yeah, that... Actually, Townsend should have written that into a song, and it probably would have been better than the songs that are actually on the album. They're kind of middling. Interestingly, I forget which of the songs it was. One of the tracks had a music video that is straight up the first movement of Ted Hughes' Iron Man story, where the giant steps off the cliff and breaks into pieces and then reassembles itself, and then also him getting buried. Like, so up through kind of that point, there's one of the songs they did a music video for and did like some stop motion animation and model work and stuff like that. So definitely worth checking that out. But then to see that go into the Brad Bird version, and that Bird approached this with he was very fast and loose with that kind of source material. There were things that you can clearly see were drawn from it, the ability of the giant to rebuild itself, some of those kinds of things. And there are other things that he just scrapped entirely and came at this with, I loved his what if statement. And we'll discuss, what if a gun had a soul? And what if it didn't want to be a gun anymore? And that's super interesting that was kind of the take that he was doing.
And that was his pitch to Warner Brothers
his
too.
Pitch. And everybody's like biting their nails like, oh gosh, this could go really poorly.
Warner Brothers was like, stamp, children's movie.
Yep. Love it. Well, and ironically, even as you watch the movie, and there's some light language and some of the situations are a little more adult, Brad Bird the entire time was saying, we're Warner Brothers, we're not Disney. This is
right.
This
we're
is
not going.
PG, not
we're not
G.
going cute.
Yeah.
Which is funny, looking back on that now, because apparently, Incredibles 2, it just came out. I went to see it.
Yeah.
And there was some backlash online about it having cursing in it. You know, it had a few curse words, and there were people being like, "You need to know this if you're taking your kids," and all this. And I went and saw it, and I was like, I don't even remember.
I don't remember that either.
I don't remember hearing it, but it's funny because I saw that, and then I went back and rewatched Iron Giant, and there's a lot more cussing in this movie.
Totally.
And it's so funny because this came out in '99. You know, it's been out forever. It's a beloved movie, and it's so funny that it's the same director, and it's like, hey, guys, chill. It could be Iron Giant. They're cussing all the time in that movie. So if your kid has seen that, you're fine.
You're
with,
good.
You're
good
fine
with
with Incredibles too. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, but that idea that it can be that a gun would have a soul and choose not to be
now
a gun.
To me, though, that's the point where I feel like even so. Again, the original, it's a fairy tale. I feel like this one, especially because it's talking about the idea of a soul and sort of the metaphysical, and that's more the focus. I feel like this is actually more, and fortunately our podcast is a sci-fi and fantasy podcast, because I feel like this story is actually a little more fantastical than it is sci-fi, really. Like, if you actually look at what it's presenting. What did you take away? Like, do you feel like this is a work of sci-fi? Like, does it really belong in that camp?
This is totally hard sci-fi to me. Okay,
hard sci-fi.
Not hard sci-fi as far as...
Wow. So
it's not Vern sci-fi.
Belongs in a Gernsback publication.
I don't see it just because they talk about souls. Something that's internal. That's a thing that people can debate on if people have a soul or if we're just electrical... signals being jumped around a body and there's nothing more than that. I get that. But I feel like that's just a conversation had. It is an idea in it, but I don't feel like the idea of do you have a soul is the focus as much as what do you do with it.
Mm-hmm. But see,
like, do you do with who you are?
I would still say that puts it more in the camp of a fantasy story, where those stories are more about your personhood. The classic hero's journey is kind of that story. You're a person. What do you do with that? How do you grow as a person?
Yeah, but Star Trek is that too. It's a bunch of morality tales as well.
Sometimes, yeah. And I would say sometimes those episodes are more fantastical than...
Well, I feel it's not wrong to call this sci-fi. It may have some fantasy ideas in it or things that don't line up very well with hard science.
But what sci-fi do you feel like? What are the things in this that make you say this is definitely sci-fi?
Well, First Contact.
That's interesting.
First contact with something foreign outside of the world, something alien. So that's very much entrenched in sci-fi.
It's true.
Of having, is there intelligence out there? If there is, what is it? If it came here, what would it want? And this has a unique take on it of something that's come and doesn't realize what it is. Mm-hmm. So that's a cool, unique take on that familiar trope within sci-fi. But yeah, First Contact. There's AI. Like, because he
is the giant a robot?
I always, since I watched it and then on this rewatch, I assume that it is a robot sent by an alien race. Like, it was built by an alien race that is, physical, that they're not mechanical. But there's nothing to say that is the truth. I mean, Brad Bird left it completely open on purpose, not giving the origin. Did you check out that?
I haven't had a chance to see the scene that you're...
Okay, I'll just go. Yeah. I'll tell you a little bit about it.
Spoil it for me.
So, a few years back, the signature edition for Iron Giant came out, and it came with 2 new scenes. One is just a personal scene between Annie and Dean in the coffee shop or the diner. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I have her name right. Annie? The mom. Anyway.
That's all I can think of.
I think of her as the mom.
She was the mom.
I think that's her name. Anyway, so there's that scene, which is good. It's a good scene.
Annie Hughes.
Okay, Annie Hughes. So there's that scene, and then there's a scene after Hogarth has his talk with the giant of what, about death and what a soul is, and then he leaves to go home, and Dean is in his house. The giant is out on the scrap pile. Giant falls asleep and has a dream about, I would assume, about what he is and where he's from. And it starts with he's in a long line of other metal men marching on a city, and then it cuts. It's like a fever dream. It's like cutting all around. It cuts to his vision of Hogarth with the gun pointed at him, and then him honing in on him, and then it shows the deer in his dream. It also shows a city that is being obliterated by fire from space, and it shows him he looks down into some water on the ground and sees his gun self that comes out later in the movie. It's obscured, so you can't see it very well, so that isn't...
Yeah, because that's a big surprise in the film when that happens.
Yeah, it's not revealed right there because it's murky. It's like maybe muddy water, and so you kind of get an idea that it's something a little different than what you see with him. And it's really cool because he starts having this dream, and then the signal of his dream jumps over to Dean's TV, and Dean is asleep in his recliner, and the TV wakes him up, and he's seeing what the giant is dreaming. It's pretty cool. Yeah, definitely check it out.
Wow, yeah.
And so the question is, and he's amongst several other of his kind that look just like him, like an assembly line, that it's a bunch of Iron Men, and they're marching on a city. And so the idea is, were they supposed to, did something go wrong and he's the only one left, and he came crashing down to Earth? Was this supposed to be an invasion of Earth, or is this just a dream, that this isn't really his origin? This is his psyche, because he just had that encounter with the deer dying and Hogarth talking about death and him almost shooting Hogarth. So is this just him working out subconsciously what he is? Why did he come here? Did I come here to destroy? Or is it actual, his programming, what he was supposed to come here to do?
Well, part of the reason I asked that question too, there are a lot of theorists who, in looking at like deep space travel, have realized that it's going to be really hard for squishy, organic, human beings who live maybe 100 years if they're lucky to actually get anywhere. And so you've seen things like Wall-E that has, or other shows that have like a generational ship where you're kind of growing up and living and dying, and there's another generation that comes behind you that, and that's the way that you get somewhere else.
And they send Wall-E, they send a robot back to Earth. No physical person goes. Or
as is the case with like Passengers, where everybody goes to sleep. There are a lot of people who are like, it's going to be hard for people to get into deep space. And so there's some people who speculate if we can actually get a human-like intelligence into a machine, maybe that's our way to crack deep space travel. And so we actually basically put the mind of a person into a robotic body that's able to endure centuries and centuries, and let's shoot that out there and let it go explore, and that's that the giant could have been an organic, possibly
at some point, with his consciousness uploaded to a metal body.
And I would say that idea of it having a soul, I question whether a machine intelligence would have a soul.
Well, yeah, I mean that's in sci-fi over and over and over again. Of no, this is just a machine,
Yeah.
It doesn't have a soul.
It could definitely have self-awareness.
Or
it could have personhood. There are a lot of those types of things, but a metaphysical being, I don't know that we have the ability to imbue that into something.
Right. When you think about I feel like we keep talking about robots, so I keep coming back to Westworld. That's a big thing that's talked about in that. There's I think in Black Mirror, where they, when people are on their deathbeds and they're taking their consciousness out and putting them into basically like a server for them to live in this digital heaven, basically.
Yeah.
And so the idea of, well, what is actually them?
Yeah.
Is this just information you're extracting? What is this that's now in the machine? Or Ghost in the Shell. These things have been done over and over again in sci-fi. And so that's very well tread ground. And so when it comes to this movie, I like Hogarth's simple explanation of when the giant says he's asking him about death.
Yeah.
He's like, die? He's like, yeah, he's like, it's not bad to die. And he asks, will I die? He says, I don't know. You're made of metal, but you have feelings and you think about things. And that means you have a soul.
Yep, there you go.
So by this kid's
definition
is, he has a soul because he thinks about things and he has feelings. So he has a soul. So that's the AI part of the story of getting in. They don't dive really deep. That's not the focus of the narrative, but it's there. And you think about it. Well, and you were talking about, uploading a consciousness and then sending something across the world. Even if it's not that, even if he is just machine created by something else, something organic. I mean, that's what we're doing right now. Like everything that we've sent to Mars has been machine. And so it would make sense that the first things to reach out to get anywhere would be machine before man. And so that, in my mind, I guess that's where I've always gone when watching it, is somebody created this thing and sent it out and something went wrong and he crashed down and can't remember.
They all took a left at Albuquerque and he took a right and ended up in the wrong galaxy entirely.
Well, there was another thing that the story group for the movie, they had talked about possibly he was a part of a convoy of all of these Iron Men not going to Earth, and somehow he got left out, or something happened to where he got off course and is away from the convoy and lost them. And then after a long time of traveling through space and nothingness, he comes to Earth.
Lucky he smacked into Earth and not like the sun or a black hole.
Right. Or Jupiter.
Yeah.
Nothing there.
Yep. A lot of gravity.
Yeah. So he's lucky in that regard.
So one of the things that stood out to me about this, and this kind of contrasts with the sci-fi nature of it, there is a classic theme or story type genre that is present in this work. And it actually is part of the reason that we ended up tapping into this work to begin with, because when we were talking about, well, what episodes do we want to talk about? And you said, let's do something like E.T. And we didn't just do E.T., we picked the Iron Giant. And we picked it because those two stories are very similar. They're both the story of a boy and his fill in the blank.
A boy and these particular ones, a boy and his alien, a boy and his
robot giant,
who's also from space. Yeah.
So that subgenre is huge, and it's older than dirt. Whenever we started talking about this episode, I feel like that's one of the things that I really wanted to look at, is this subgenre of a boy and his whatever stories. And so I looked, took a cursory glance around the internet, and thanks to TV Tropes, which is an awesome sort of wiki format encyclopedia of tropes in media, they actually have an entry for a boy and his ex, and they have examples from all the way back to the first civilization that we have stories written down from. We're writing boy and his whatever stories. In this case, they cite an example of a boy who is abandoned on a desert island and raised by a gazelle. So these stories, and I'm sure both of us could go back and forth and never run out of Boy and his whatever stories from the past.
Mm-hmm. Well, the ancient one that, because you went far back on that.
Yeah.
The ancient one that immediately comes to mind for me is Romulus and Remus, with Rome.
Yep.
Raised by wolves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the legend behind
Which that very theme is then copied by Rudyard Kipling whenever he does the Jungle Book. And Mowgli is adopted by a panther and then raised by wolves.
Mm-hmm.
There are, I think of some of the Greek myths where a hero is palled up with some mythical being or creature. So the Pegasus is one of those that stands out. So in a lot of ways now, I feel like there's a line between some of these stories where if the thing is too conscious, it kind of like shifts into being a different type of story. But this is where you're really paired up with something that is on your level or maybe even below your level intellectually, and it kind of reverses things from being the kid. You're now in charge of something else. This is sort of your first step in responsibility.
Because if it's another human, it's a buddy story.
Absolutely.
Which this I feel like is a subgenre of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's the buddy tale, and so if it's human, that's its own thing. But this is human and something, I guess, for our purposes, you could say is lesser.
Yeah.
Either an animal or a creature or a machine.
Something that it has, because like a kid in a lot of ways is not familiar with the world and the way that the world works and doesn't have like an adult understanding of things. But they have at least been familiarized with a lot of things and understand how some basic things work. And so this is something that has even less understanding of the world than that.
So yeah, it's like, and that's why that's why it works. One of the reasons it works is because you have a character, usually the X, whether it's animal or in this case, the Iron Giant, or an alien or something. Sometimes those need to learn how to be in the world or learn how to get through. And so the character of the boy, the kid, whoever it is, they're a good character for them to have because kids talk in simple terms, just like the quote that I read before of him describing what a soul is. That's very much how a kid would describe what a soul is and explain death and explain life to something that doesn't know it.
Yeah.
And so in that way, it's simple enough for the other form to understand. It's simple to get across to the audience, and it also shows their relationship and how they are similar and different.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of these stories start out with just communication as the baseline. So how do you build a rapport or communicate with something that functions totally differently than you?
Mm-hmm. There's a few tropes from it that I feel like either this is how I would describe when I was thinking through what is a boy and its X. What is the familiar story beats that it goes through that make it to where someone would say, oh, that's this kind of story. And I kept thinking about these, and there's some works that buck against this, and so they're not this, and even the Iron Giant doesn't fit all of these, but this is kind of what I think of. Number one, the human and the animal, the X or whatever it is, have something in common, or some things in common, that gives them an initial bond. Or the opposite of that, they are opposed from the beginning and then find out through their opposition and being stuck together that they have that commonality, and that comes later down the road. But a lot of it, usually in these stories, because a lot of them are kid focused, there's something from the get that bonds the two characters. Something that either with basically like their version of a meet cute, of them going through something together from the beginning, or there's something that the characters recognize in each other that connects them.
I feel like a lot of times that for me is the point of connection, and the Iron Giant's a really good example of this, where one of them saves the other one and that builds this bond. I think a lot of these stories have some initial moment where again, maybe they're scary E.T., whenever they first run into each other, there's this fear, but then they end up, linked to one another. And so, that I feel like crops up a lot in these types of works where there's something, the initial meeting is really dramatic or really, potentially dangerous or hazardous, and they have to help each other through that, which forms the bond.
And these two, specifically for the Iron Giant, these two characters, though we're introduced to both of them, and we don't know much about Hogarth or the Iron Giant. You learn more about them as you go through the story, but from the beginning you get a taste of they both are missing a familial connection, because you know that Hogarth has a mom. You don't see his dad. After a while you quickly get the picture of, oh, she's a single mom. Like, they're not referencing him. He's not coming home. He's not in the picture because Hogarth is home alone. And then later on, you see the picture beside his bed. But you know fairly close to the beginning that he's missing that familial connection with his dad. The Iron Giant is all alone as well. He doesn't remember, where he came from or who he is, and so he's missing any connection to anything. And so that naturally works. That's a good place to start with two characters, because what they're missing, they immediately find in each other.
I feel like a lot of these types of stories, so the big example of this that stands out to me is the How to Train Your Dragon series. And Hiccup does not have his mother early on. And then when you get into the second one, again, this is a spoiler-heavy show, so stop and go watch. They're like, why do I have to keep stopping and watching things? The second one, he actually loses his dad. I'm actually really interested and excited to see the third one in the series, which is coming out in the not-too-distant future, where they're going to now have to deal with that. What is his life going to be like in the absence of his father? And so that... Yeah, and even
the third one? The third one's out.
Is it already out?
I think it is.
Dude, you're blowing my mind right now. If it's already out,
I'm pretty sure.
Holy cow!
Pretty sure that's come and gone in theaters.
You know what? No way.
I think so. Yeah, because I'm gonna blow your mind here. This isn't a spoiler because it's in the trailers. His mom comes back.
That's 2.
That's 2?
That's the second one.
Oh.
Yeah, How to Train Your Dragon 3 is coming out next year.
Oh man, I thought they were further along. I guess it's because there's all these other things on Netflix.
Oh, well, they do the little mini movies and things like that.
I guess that's what I was thinking.
So in that, and even his relationship with his dad in the first one of those is estranged. So there's all this built in there. Yeah.
Right, he's missing his mom, and his dad is a manly man, and he's not. He's a dork, and so he's not connecting with a family member, and then finds the dragon.
Yeah,
yeah, and the same thing with E.T. E.T. is a movie about divorce, and his father isn't there, and then the alien shows up, and they immediately form a bond. Yeah, it's very much okay. So that's the first thing that I think about when I think about A Boy and His Ex, is that initial connection, the commonality. There's then number 2. There's something lacking in the human, or sometimes in the ex. Or both, and that the other helps them to remedy this through a strength that they have. So either the main character is lacking something, and through this connection with this new found friend, that's highlighted, where it may be it's a strength that the ex has, that the boy or the child or whoever is lacking. And they're able to teach them that strength, or there's something that through them working together, they remedy that. And so with Hogarth, he has no friends. He's a dork. Because he's smarter and he's gone up a grade, the kids bully him because they're not as fast as he is. There's another deleted scene that I saw. It didn't make it back for the signature edition, but it's a great scene where they're in class and the teacher asks a question, and the only one who raises their hand is Hogarth. She's like,
he would be that kid.
Right. And she's like, does anyone other than Hogarth know the answer to this question? And she's like, and no one does. And she's like, okay, well then everyone who's not Hogarth will need to write me a 2-page over the weekend. And then all the kids
hate him. Yeah,
all the kids hate him, look at him, and they're like,
Yeah.
just put your hand down, dork. Like,
Yeah.
don't do that. And so he's kind of an outcast. I think he's up a grade, and so he's not fitting in there.
Mm-hmm.
And so he is missing connection with his peers, people his age. And the giant also is lacking humanity. He's lacking, because he's very much, at the beginning, he's very much a machine. He walks like a machine. This is a cool thing that I saw Brad Bird was talking about in the extra features, is that at the beginning of the movie, he's very mechanical in his movements, and they did that on purpose. He walks like a machine. He has his arms out. He when you see him grab stuff to eat, it's very...
It is,
his movements are very stiff,
and,
like a old style robot. Chomp, chomp, chomp on the metal, almost like there's nothing there. This is a machine. And then as the movie goes, he gets more and more and more fluid, till at the end he's super fluid, until of course he turns into the weapon, and then he's immediately very mechanical again, which is a great way of visually showing the differences of him being there and him not being there, like consciously, or his humanity being gone. But that's something at the beginning. He's missing identity, and he's missing humanity, and through his connection with Hogarth, he starts to gain that, understanding his identity, who he is, developing who he is, and Hogarth as well. That is one gripe I would have about this movie. I feel like the giant goes through a lot more of an arc than Hogarth does.
Absolutely.
And so that way I've wondered, is it reversed? Because there's sometimes where there's the boy in the X is reversed.
Yeah.
And is the giant
the boy
and Hogarth the X, because he's also bigger in stature. Mm-hmm. He's also more technologically advanced, and so you could make the argument that he is the higher being. And so is Hogarth the dog or the whatever teaching him?
That's funny. That's really interesting.
There's properties that will turn it on its head, like The Good Dinosaur does that.
I haven't seen that one. Yeah.
The Good Dinosaur it's focused on the dinosaur.
So I'm going to pause this episode and go watch that right now.
Well, this is just...
Oh, this is the premise?
This is the premise. It's not a spoiler. And he gets lost from his family.
Yeah.
Funny, it's kind of like The Land Before Time. But he's like a brontosaurus or something, gets lost, and then he finds this little caveman boy that is just he's a little kid, but he's a caveman. He doesn't know how to speak. And it's funny because the dinosaurs know how to speak. They're pretty intelligent in the movies. But then he gets this really dumb kid who follows him around, and then
that's fun.
That's this boy in his story. And so I've wondered if this is a play on that and a twisting of it. What do you think?
I definitely, part of it, I find Hogarth a little insufferable throughout the whole thing. So it's hard for me to get behind Hogarth as the protagonist of the story. And I find the robot story super compelling. Yeah. So his portion of that, now it to me, I guess where I would come down is that both characters, so again, similar to the How to Train Your Dragon series, both characters are learning from each other and have things to benefit from each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And they do that really well. They show it more subtly in Hogarth, that at the end he does have some friends. Dean, he does have Dean as a father figure. Yep. So that's been replaced.
Yeah, I would even...
Or not replaced, but added to his family.
Yeah, I would even say that, and one of the things that I heard Brad Bird say about the film is that gradually the giant progresses. And so at first, with the rock, tree, it's basically a baby. Like, it's learning baby words, like it's incredibly basic. And as it it grows, it becomes more than that.
Right.
And
it
so
can
it goes from
understand abstract
baby to
things.
pet to buddy. And so I feel like in that sense it does by the end kind of evolve into where it's almost a buddy story.
Yeah, that is true. Because it has an evolution like that, which is not always the case in these stories because something is confined to what it is, whereas this it's able to gain intelligence. Yeah. I would say, it even does that more so than E.T.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, another thing. The human and the X come in conflict with each other that test their bond and their bonds and their or their character's integrity.
Totally, yeah.
There's usually a point in the story where the two who have been getting along, been learning, been overcoming some small obstacles way before the big conflict.
Yeah.
Before you get to the biggest conflict of the story, there's usually some sort of falling out, or one does something to the other that causes there to be a break. And so in this story, the giant fires on Hogarth. He sees his gun, goes back into his old ways, and shoots at Hogarth. Hogarth doesn't know that he's done it.
I love that scene too.
Yeah, he's just
that
goofing
he's
around.
so oblivious to it, while Dean observes the whole thing and catches it.
Right. Well, talking in that way, there's so many points in this movie that there's really heavy adult stuff, and honestly, when you break it down, it's a kid playing with a gun in a junkyard.
Wow, I had not thought of it like that.
Yeah,
but
well, there's a lot of things that are very 50s about this movie that when you bring them into today, it's like, oh, that would be so weird today.
Yeah.
Like the whole Mansley always following and being with a kid.
Yeah.
That's so weird.
Yeah.
in today's context of and she just rents out a room to him. He's a complete stranger. And has him in the barn with the light. And it's like, this is
crossing a lot of lines right now.
Yeah. And so, that scene is if you break it down, it's a kid playing with a loaded gun.
Wow. I had not thought of it in those terms.
That's pretty dark.
That's totally what the movie's saying, so now I'm not going to be able to think of it otherwise. But
that where they come in conflict is the giant fires on Hogarth, which Dean is the one who sees and is like, get away, and he's trying to tear them apart because of his reaction, and Dean banishes the giant. He's like, get out of here. And so there's that initial rip, which I feel like this movie quickly fixes.
Oh, yeah.
There's places where it's...
Yes and no, because I do feel like when the military attack and it switches back into gun mode, or turns into super mecha gun mode.
Yeah.
I feel like at that point there still is the conflict. Now, Hogarth, I guess, is over it to some degree, but you kind of get the inversion of that where the robot is turned on all of humanity, and Hogarth, as part of that, is,
Yeah, that's true. But usually in these, it's like, get out. It's the kid being like, get out of here.
Throwing rocks at the dogs.
Yeah, I don't want you anymore. Like, how would you do this why would you do this kind of thing?
Yeah.
Where in this one, it's just like, Dean's like, you almost killed him. Get out of here. And then immediately Hogarth's like, no, I want my giant back. And he runs off for him. And so that's usually in there. It's in here kind of briefly at that point, but it still follows it. And then the final one I have is the human and X band together to overcome the final climactic obstacle that neither of them can face alone. There's usually, in these stories, some final force that one of them... Like if you think of E.T., it's Elliot's love that helps, or E.T.'s dying. This is the climax. E.T.'s dying. The government has taken him away. And so part of it
pause
is...
this episode if you haven't seen E.T.
Who hasn't seen E.T.? Come on.
Actually, I don't think my wife has seen E.T.
Oh.
I know, right?
Really?
Yeah.
That's so good.
But anyway. So the climax of E.T.
Yeah, and so, but Elliot, through Elliot's love and their connection, he's able to revive him. Then he goes on the run with him, but also E.T. is able to, with his space magic, help him and the kids fly away from the cops and the government and get, to where he can get to his ship. And so they both bring something and band together in order to defeat, How to Train Your Dragon. They have to, it's not just that there's a dragon, there's a rider on that's helping with, the movements and tactical part of it. So it's them and their connection together that makes them a force that can fix whatever the problem is. And so they have to come together. In this movie, Hogarth and his friends with his mom and Dean they're able to save the giant from the army because they're able to show, no, I'm not dead. It was based on that lie that he had killed Hogarth. No, I'm alive. And he's able to get in front of the general and be like, he's attacking because you are attacking. So if you do it again, it's all going to start again. And so they're able to save the giant through them coming in, getting in front of the army and getting them to stop. But then on the other part is the giant, because idiot Mansley grabbed the horn and said, fire the rocket, fire the atomic bomb. Then the giant has to step in and he sacrifices himself in order to save Hogarth and the town.
I feel like, though, that second attack is really the real... I honestly wonder, and even the way the film ends, I don't know that the nuclear bomb would have stopped the giant and just would have killed all of the people in Rockwell.
Well, it would have obliterated him in the idea of it would have separated his parts.
It would have separated his parts, but we've seen that's not a huge problem.
Right.
So he would have just been back together and everybody would have been dead.
If anything, this was more inconvenient because it spread his parts out over the world.
Yeah. So,
and it's taking a while for him. If he got blasted right there, his parts would come together a lot quicker.
So I feel like what the two overcome together is and again, going back to kind of Brad Bird's core question, what if it has a soul and what if it doesn't want to be a gun? And that it actually takes both of them to help the giant do that so that the giant can be something else.
Right. That he can choose to be the hero and not the villain. And even though his sacrifice, you don't know until the epilogue that he's still alive. Does he know that he's going to survive the blast?
I don't probably think. I get the impression that he doesn't.
I think he knows he's going up there to die, and so he's willing to make that sacrifice for his friend.
Yeah, I would not have been surprised if the end of the film was more, it didn't drive at the point that the giant's fine, because that's what it says at the end. The giant's fine.
Yeah,
I would have an ending that's more vague. I almost expected where maybe you cut at the point where the neck or the jaw bolt goes out the window and that's it, and you don't see it all coming back together. But
that would be cool
to give you a little bit of hope. But
or even if it starts blinking and doing its sound, just a little bit there, and then Hogarth is like, what is could there be?
And then Brad Bird could have had Iron Giant 2, except that.
Well, it's funny because
I don't think Warner Brothers was interested in making any more animated films after this one. So
because it didn't bring in much money. Yeah, well, that was the thing too, is that people asked him afterward. He's like, "Oh, is that a setup for Iron Giant 2?" He's like, "No, it was only meant to be a happy ending."
Which is good for the kids. Like, that's great for the kiddos. Like,
right.
Don't worry, the friendly giant is okay. He's alive.
In a heavy movie talking about death and souls and where do you go afterward, it's nice to know that he has an afterlife. After he is obliterated. That's a nice note to end on. Yeah. So what are some other modern examples of this?
Well, I've referenced, and I'm a super like I love the How to Train Your Dragon series, and that one for me stands out. It is the picture perfect example of this trope.
It's a good one. It's a very popular one right now too.
And the 3D, by the way, if you get a chance to see the third one, which has not come out yet,
I've seen the first one. I really liked it.
Worth seeing in 3D. This is one of those that is a must in 3D.
Oh, okay.
Whenever you go see it in theaters, definitely catch it because the first two have been fantastic. They're great 3D films.
Okay.
So
the second one holds up? It's good sequel?
Yeah. It's darker, which I feel like often happens with sequels.
Right.
But
middle chapter.
In an appropriate way. Like it presents there's a certain simplicity to the first one, and by the end, all the Vikings are friends with dragons now.
Right.
And the second one is like, well, wait, there's still a world out there, and there are going to be people who haven't found the balance that we've learned to live in, and what happens when we interact with those people, and so it is a little more dour, I guess, a little more down in its tone. And again, spoiler alert, the dad dies. So
that's okay.
He was a great character, and the thing is,
Who's that, Gerard Butler?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
The first one, you kind of like you're like, give your kid a break. I mean, come on, man.
Yeah, he's rough.
But
the first one.
The second one, you learn to love this character. Like they do a great job of building up that relation, and like showing how after the events of the first one, how the relationship between those two characters has mended, and how
that's nice.
Stoic is now ready to pass on the leadership of the tribe to Hiccup. Like he's setting him up for that and is proud of it. And so you get this, and then the mom comes into the picture in that film, and so many relationships restored, and then it's all kind of dashed, and so there's a you feel it. There are a lot of heavy themes to.
Yeah, that is this particular film genre or trope. The boy and his ex can dive deep into emotions and heavy personal stakes.
Well, a lot of times the ex will die in these stories.
That is true.
And so
Old Yeller,
Where the Red Fern Grows is one. So I grew up in the Ozarks, and you can't grow up in the Ozarks without interacting with, whether it's like our claim to fame, I guess, except only people in the Ozarks even know it exists. But this book about a boy who raises these like hunting dogs and befriends them, and in the end they both die and they're buried where the red fern grows.
Oh. Fertilize that ground.
Yeah, I remember all of us third graders were like in tears when our teacher was reading that last chapter. It's like
just rip your heart out.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, Old Yeller's the same way. Yeah.
Well, I mean, trying to think of other ones now. I mean, E.T. He dies, but he comes back.
If you watch Pokemon, the TV series, that's totally a boy and his Pikachu.
Right. When I thought of there's so many animated. I wrote down a few and I broke them up by animated and live action because there's just a ton of animated ones. What do you think of Up? Is Up an old man and his boy, and a boy and his dog, and a boy and his giant bird?
Totally, yeah, 100%.
Because I was thinking, because I went through these story points, and I'm like, this kind of fits for
well, I could definitely see with the boy, his involvement in it. For me, a lot of these stories work because the boy in the story, or the girl, whoever it is, there's a certain naivete that children especially, but even younger adults have, where they're open to things. And so like in The Iron Giant, where the adult reaction to the giant is, fear, suspicion, there's this desire to get it out or kill it. It takes a kid or somebody who's open to things, hasn't been as jaded by the world, in order to be willing to accept and adopt whatever the thing is. So in E.T., you need a kid because an adult is going to report the alien to the authorities, whereas a kid is going to be more open to learning from it and befriending it, and we'll look at it through a different lens.
Because they have initial fear of the unknown, but because they're kids, they have a intrigue that is, they're learning so much and everything is new to them. And so this thing is just another new thing. And so they want to learn about it as well. Whereas someone who's older and thinks that they know their world and everything is not going to accept a crazy factor like this coming in, and immediately is going to maybe even be opposed to it.
Sometimes in these stories you do have, and I guess is his name Walter in Up? Is that the old man's name?
Oh, I think so.
That feels right. I'm naming him Walter.
We'll just call him Walt. Yeah.
So I feel like in Up, that character is it kind of fits into it. Sometimes these stories will have like the adult or the boy will have that like attitude, like, go away right off the bat, like, leave me alone, why are you following me, dog? And so in that sense, I guess you could say that even he fits. Yeah.
And it's funny because his is a little against the norm, because he's the opposite of the trend. He's very closed off, doesn't want anything to do with either of these characters.
Except that he's turning his house into a balloon blimp and still is fixated on his childhood fascination with traveling. Like
he's got that hardened exterior.
Old people sometimes come back around to being kids. Have you ever noticed that?
Yeah, that is true. And so he's got that adventurer still inside him. Yeah. And
I would say the characters in Batteries Not Included. Have you ever seen that film?
It's been a long time.
I would say
they're older.
They're older people, but they sort of fit that boy and his, I guess, little tiny spaceship robots. I don't even know what they are.
And maybe it's because the older person is good too, because they've lived so much life and they've gotten over so many of life's hurdles that maybe they're a bit more open to, things as they come, because it's like, well, I've lived through all of this other stuff, let's see what this is. They have maybe an adventurous spirit in that way as well. So Stranger Things 2.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Dustin and Dart.
Yeah. Dustin has his Demi dog, Dart, that he's raising up, and he has some fear of as well. But I don't know how many of these, I haven't thought about, I don't know how many of these fits that, but definitely the climactic battle right at the end, that without his bond with Dart, they wouldn't have gotten through that point, because it would have turned on all of them and attacked. So there's obviously different properties do this better than others. And there's a recent property that I think this is in, or at least they're trying to inject this in, which is Jurassic World.
Are you like Blue? Is that the relationship that you're...
Blue and Chris Pratt.
And Chris Pratt. He's just Chris Pratt in that movie. He doesn't have a character. I'm pretty sure he's just Chris Pratt in that.
He's just Chris Pratt. Yeah, so Chris Pratt and Blue, like they have, which in this latest movie, they did the...
I loved in that film...
Baby Blue?
Baby Blue was... Those sequences, they could do a prequel Baby Blue movie and just expand on that content that they created.
Right.
I'd be all about that.
Yeah, so they do they show the initial connection. It's almost kind of like a retcon on the previous movie because there was people thinking like, these wouldn't listen to this guy. They would eat him. They can't train a raptor. Yeah. But they went back and they're like, no, they have a relation. This is how it took a lot of time and them connecting together. And so I'm not saying it's a great boy and his ex, but it's at least in there.
I know there are a lot of detractors, but I have enjoyed the Jurassic World reboot of the franchise. Like, so
I will say I'm interested to see where it's going.
Yeah,
this last one was okay.
Yeah,
I felt it was okay. I enjoyed the first one, the first Jurassic World, more than this one. But they at least made some decisions and not just rehashed. I will say that. Anyway, that's another topic that we can get on later. But yeah, so that was some live action examples that I was trying to think of.
Those definitely they're less common, but there's still a whole heap of them.
In those ways, like those two, Stranger Things and that one, these are kind of injected into a larger story. They're not the main focus.
I find it interesting. So one of the works that I remembered, and especially with this being a giant robot and his boy, I went back and read the first chapter of iRobot, which is titled Robbie, and it's about a girl and her robot. And it's a short story, and I feel like with short stories, a lot of times there's a sort of a narrowing of focus. You may not necessarily get the entire arc that we've talked about, but you definitely get elements. And so, great little story about a girl who treats her robot like a person, and especially this girl's mother is very nervous. Is she maladjusted because of the way that she's treating this robot? And the dad ends up kind of pulling this trick later to show that no, the relationship that they have is actually beneficial. And so I feel like I talk too much about Asimov because I love me some Isaac Asimov, especially the robot stories. But that one kicks off iRobot really well, and it's a fun kind of heartwarming story. I think it actually was a short story separate from the work, and it was kind of rewritten to be included in the body of that work.
It's on my list, Brett. All right, give me a break.
Yeah,
I will read it in due time.
As we keep going through these sci-fi works, there's going to be a robot about every 3 or 4 episodes.
There's a lot in them. Yeah, even if they're not the main focus, there's a robot around.
There is no escaping robots. So, just to kind of conclude our discussion about the Iron Giant, let's talk about kind of the core ideas or messages that you picked up as you were interacting with this. There are a lot of themes that come out of that idea of a boy and his X subgenre. But what was the biggest takeaway for you?
I think there's a core message that is very evident in the movie. And it's very obvious that this is the statement that they're making. But there is another one as well that's a bit more surface. It's obvious too. It's not the core, but it's one of the big messages conveyed is that fear of the unknown is foolish and can be harmful.
Yeah.
That having a healthy fear is fine because that is a natural human reaction, but letting fear get the most of you and that being what you choose to act on before understanding, like rampant fear, being in control before there's a chance to understand is error. And that's very much the storyline of Mansley.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Whereas there's the storyline of, it's really great because they are two sides of the coin, the Iron Giant and Mansley, whereas the Iron Giant is thinking he's possibly a villain who turns out to be the hero, whereas Mansley from the beginning is, I'm the hero who turns out to be the villain. Mm-hmm. And it's because of how they're different or what they choose to act on that makes them, the menace from space. It's funny because early on in the movie, Hogarth is watching one of those old sci-fi B movies, which they didn't choose to go with like giant ants or anything like that so on the nose, but that's really big in those old movies of that time is the giant menace coming, and then the army has to go and take care of it and shoot it down, whatever huge insect or monster that it is, Godzilla, whatever. And that's very much in the vein of, the movie he was watching was a brain that I guess will probably grow and terrorize a town. Sure. I'm sure that's what that was heading to.
That's what I would expect to see in that movie.
Yeah. And so there's that, it's playing on that trope, that idea, that this very familiar thing from back in that time. And that's Mansley is that character who thinks he's the hero because he's immediately knowing this is a menace and I'm going to be the one to take care of it. I'm going to be the hero without standing, by the I like the townspeople in this because they're not the pitchfork town. Did you think about that or notice that? In a lot of old fiction, there you can find the townspeople who immediately get riled up with pitchforks and fire, and they're going to go after the monster. But in this, you have the government with Mansley and then the army coming in, and their objective is kill this thing, get rid of it. You have Hogarth on the opposite end of accept this thing, and the townspeople I feel like fall in the middle, whereas they're fearful. The people who have come in contact with the giant are fearful. There's people, the train conductors that are, get derailed, and they're like, what is this thing? And so word is getting around town slowly, you can see. And then when the giant comes into town to save the two boys, there's that initial fear, but people don't start shooting it immediately, or they're not all like,
is Maine a conceal and carry state?
I don't know. None of them were packing at the time. That's what it was.
Yeah.
But
I think that is a little more realistic, because the reaction to something like that, especially, I mean, the giant isn't quite like Lovecraftian, elder god levels of horror, but like it definitely, if you were standing in its presence, you would be overwhelmed by it. And so I don't think your first thought would be like, let me stab it with a pitchfork. I think your first thought would be like, how can I cower and get away from this thing safely?
Yeah. And so I think it's calling for, I think the movie is calling for a balance of understanding, like try to understand what is different, what is opposed, or not even opposed, but what is unknown to you, not to immediately jump to like xenophobia or belief that this thing because it has the potential. Mansley even at one part says, I don't care where it is, if it possibly is a threat, we need to blow it to smithereens. And that mindset is what drives him to make a really foolish decision.
I've wondered if this has to do with neural plasticity to a degree, but as we get older, our brains are wired less to learn new things and interact with new things, because we get to a point where most of the things we interact with, we've had interactions with before. We're not shaping things as much. And I feel like there is a certain message to adults in all of these types of stories, but especially in this, that sometimes you need to have the perspective that a kid has, rather than having the adult kind of jaded, narrow perspective that a lot of times we do have. We put blinders on, and our perspective must be the right perspective. And I think whenever you get that way, and especially in a situation where you're in like an echo chamber, the military and Mansley and all these people are saying the same message and have the same idea, and there's a certain amount of even like confirmation bias, so they feel like they need to shoot the thing, so they shoot the thing. Well, then the thing just needs to defend itself, so it gets more armed and gives them
more reason to
shoot it. And so they just keep, it's this self-perpetuating cycle of destruction. And I think a lot of times adults especially, we're notorious for getting ourselves into that. And I think sometimes we need to take a pill and realize that we don't have things that much more figured out than kids have, and we need to be a little more open.
But one thing, because a lot of people will look at this and say, "Oh, this movie's about gun control." Like this movie is just like, saying, "Oh, guns are evil and get them out of here." But I feel like it does a good job too of showing that, like, Hogarth isn't perfect, and he immediately is like, this giant that I don't know anything about is my friend, and he's good. Like, we're fine. And then you go to that scene where he targets him and shoots at him. And so there's also a need for wisdom. There's also a need for understanding, and not just because he's in full acceptance of him immediately after they have that initial bond, and he's just treating him a lot of the time as a toy, or as a playmate. Where in Dean, it's funny because Dean at multiple times, he's kind of like the voice the voice of reason, the balanced person, because even though he's hip and cool and is not gonna, help the G-Man or the government at all because he's the beatnik, but he also is like yelling at Hogarth and saying, we don't know what he is.
Yeah.
And he's very much shown to be the rational, I think, the balanced character of, you got Hogarth on the one extreme, you've got Mansley on the other, and I think the idea is being put forth to try and understand, but don't be judging and making determinations right from the get.
Yeah. One of the things that really stood out to me as I was interacting with this, and especially doing research, things that I didn't know and you wouldn't know just in the text, this story actually came out of a lot of pain. The original Ted Hughes story, he wrote the first, so it's broken up into 5 sections, and he wrote the first section, and which kind of inspired the rest, as a result of, I didn't know this, but he was married to Sylvia Plath, who is a famous poet and probably most famous because she dealt with a lot of depression, attempted suicide, and eventually succeeded while she was married to him in committing suicide.
And them having kids.
They had children, and the first part of that story was written to his children. So it's about a giant that falls off a cliff and is broken into all these different pieces. But he's able to put himself back together. And the story that he was trying, or the idea that he was communicating to his kids was, something tragic can happen to you. In their case, losing their mother, a tragic thing that seems to kind of break you apart and break your world apart. But with time, you can put yourself back together through that, and that there is hope. And then ultimately, the giant being put back together, and the next couple of stories are about the interaction of the giant with the townspeople, and they're very, very much afraid of it. It keeps eating all their equipment, and there's the two sides don't fit well together, but they actually learn how to live in harmony. And then because the giant stayed on Earth and is active when a threat comes, the giant is the only thing that's able to protect them. And so you can actually sometimes, by learning from mistakes, or getting over some of the things that maybe are your hang-ups, you can grow. So there was that pain, but then also, I didn't know this, but Brad Bird lost his sister, who was killed by her husband in gun violence. So I didn't look into the depth of the story, but it sounded like some kind of domestic issue. And so he also, and the anti-gun message is definitely there, and I think part of it arises out of kind of the pain that he was feeling. But I think in both of these stories, you learn that there is hope, and that there is potentially more and better that you can have as a result of growing and learning from the mistakes and things that have gone wrong,
and not to just treat what has gone wrong as the bad, but as something that then gives you strength for the future.
Yeah.
Like the tragedy that happens in your past, it can always hurt. It can be something you struggle with through your life, but the fact of going through the struggle, not that you get over it and you're done with it and over, but that you have been through, and there's all kinds of things or examples of people who've been through that, then they're able to encourage other people who have been through that, or give them the tools they need in order to go through that. You talking about this makes me wonder. I wonder his Hughes kids, because he's passed, he's gone, but they're definitely still around, I would assume.
Yeah, actually, it was interesting. Hughes died right before the film was released.
Right, he never got to see it, although he did, I think I saw that he really liked the script. He liked the direction that they were going with it, and so that's nice to have that. And they, of course, named the family Hughes after him, and that's a nice little tribute to him as well. But now it makes me wonder, who they are. I would, if how that impacted them and
who
what
they
liked.
grown to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that would be interesting to maybe look up. But yeah, those you can get through tragedy, that you can grow from it and become, something more. Yeah, it's definitely in there. Another big theme, and it's pretty obvious, and I'm sure you have ran across it and know it, is the idea, and I think this is the core of you are who you choose to be.
Yeah, definitely.
That is what this film is trying to convey. It's actually said multiple times, specifically from Dean and then reiterated by Hogarth to the giant, that you aren't what has made you. You're not what you come from. You're not what you think is inside of you. It's what you do that defines you.
Yeah.
Batman right there. It's what I do that defines me. But yeah, one of the things that when Hogarth is going on his rant, with his coffee rant, and Dean's like trying to get him to chill out, and I love what he says is like, they don't, because Hogarth is talking about his bullies, and he's like, Dean says, they don't decide who you are, you do. And I really like that, because there's forces in this movie that are just trying to decide what the giant is. They are trying their best to figure out what this thing is, and they're trying to determine what it is. But in the end, none of them, I don't think any of them, especially the army and the government, would have assumed this menace that they're coming to take care of would make the sacrifice, lay down on the grenade for them. They couldn't have expected that, couldn't have known that. And so that's not anything that they could have even conceived of what this thing is. I really like that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. This film definitely is presenting that idea. Especially with the story being about what you at least have to believe is a robot. I mean, a lot of times we think of robots as being programmed. Even in the last episode, we were talking about Moon and Gertie and programming. And so the idea that something that conceivably is programmed can actually step out of that and can become something new, I think definitely is presenting the idea that we too can do that.
It's shown early on with Hogarth in his comics of the Atomo, the Metal Menace, or Superman, who is a human. He's a human. Well, he's an alien, but he, very much looks human, and he's very much the ideals of America. And that's what the giant's like, no, I don't want to be Atomo. Like when they're playing, he's like, I don't want to be Atomo. I want to be Superman. Yeah. And so I'm rejecting that label that even Hogarth is putting on him of, I want you to play as this character. He's like, no, I want to be Superman. I want to be more. I want to choose who I am.
Yeah. And I think the work at least grapples with something that I feel like is kind of a challenge and a check on this. So I like that it thought this through. But it's easy to say that during times when everything is chill. And you have, especially as adults, times whenever we have enough freedom to explore something if we want to, it's easy to say that kind of statement. Sometimes whenever the tension gets ratcheted up or life is harder, sometimes we do default to the things that we're programmed to be. I even noticed that there are times whenever, especially if things are really busy, it's easy for me to default to what I saw my dad doing.
Absolutely.
And I'm not even thinking about it. I'm not like trying, like I want to be the way my dad was in this. Sometimes it's even something that I'm not super proud of. And, and like being overly focused on work or on myself. And so I love that this message is there. I feel like there are certain times where it's very hard to at least be aware as people of that we can be something different. I think sometimes we get trapped.
Yeah. Well, just like the giant, when the bullets start flying, it's like a switch that the nurture, or not the nurture, but the nature kicks in, that what you've gone like with your parents, what you've learned and picked up and is so ingrained in you that it's second nature to you. I've been the same way with my kid. There's times where she's on my very last nerve, and I will kick into doing what I grew up knowing.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's good, sometimes it's not. Of how do we react, and what do we choose to be in those moments, because it's necessary for us to the thing you have to do is step back and say which wolf am I going to feed? This one that's inside me, that I want to be, or this one that a lot of times can take control without me realizing it. So we all have this destructive nature inside of us. We can all flip that switch and be very destructive in our relationships, be very destructive in even toward ourselves, doing things that we know are harmful to us, but they have like an instant gratification. Like the giant turning on the military, he can take out a couple tanks that'll stop firing at him, but then that brings on the atomic bomb, that brings on even more the fighters coming in and even more attention, and makes it worse. And so, yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly important. The thing I would say about that theme, it's important for us to think of it and to try, especially in those circumstances where we do feel like we're predisposed to responding in a certain way or doing a certain thing, for us to be reflective. And I think that's something that children need to learn and adults need to practice.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
it's funny sometimes that we can think as adults that is a very childish thing of jumping into a tantrum, or immediately going one way because you think that one way is barred to you, so you're going to go do this without thinking through a situation. We can see that as a very childish thing, but we do it as adults just as often.
Yeah, we've just found adult ways to do that.
Right, more they're not so explosive and obvious like children do, who show all their emotions immediately and make bigger, not bigger decisions, but just more impactful in the moment decisions, whereas ours could be pushed down a road and a little farther off, but then have major repercussions.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Nick, it's time for you to make some decisions.
Oh.
We're going to have our hot take, quick questions.
Okay.
Rapid fire. We need to come up with an actual name for this segment. The wrap up of the episode.
Rapid fire.
Rapid fire questions, vaguely, loosely related, connected to the work.
Here we go. Hit me.
You find a giant robot.
Okay.
What would be the first thing you would want to do with it?
Fly.
So
which that doesn't happen until like way down in the movie, but immediately I'm thinking, can this thing fly? That's what I would want.
Okay, so you like engage the rockets and
yeah, absolutely.
Now,
this thing got thrusters.
Wouldn't you be afraid of falling off? Like that's it, they actually addressed it in
if it's a giant
one of the commentaries
robot,
I think I watched, that one of their big concerns was whenever, especially Hogarth is in the hand, like how precarious a place that would be to just be like standing. And so often he's just like walking around the countryside, like, oh yeah, yeah.
That's him walking around. That would be really hard. He'd have to like latch on for dear life in reality.
Yeah, there did not appear to be any grippers or anything like that. Like it's just metal.
So first thing is find a good spot on it to hold on, and then see if it can fly.
Gotcha. Yeah. Which would you prefer in your robot friend? For him to suddenly turn on you and try to kill you with lasers, or for you to have to feed him tons of metal daily?
Ooh. Yeah, because in the movie, that's really hard for them to get the metal. I mean, if you have a friend who has a metal yard, that's pretty convenient.
Yeah, but do you?
I guess not.
No, you don't.
Yeah, I'd still go with the metal, because if he's turning on me with lasers,
I feel like that's pretty obvious.
Who knows how that could go down?
All right, this one tags in. We really didn't talk very much about Kent Mansley in this episode, but one of the scenes that I love when he first moves into the house and he's bugging Hogarth, he keeps referring to him by nickname.
Hey, Tiger.
Tiger,
Hey,
hey,
Scout.
Sport. What is the most annoying nickname you have ever been called?
Nick at Night.
Oh, when did you pick that one up?
It was a guy in my church would call me Nickelodeon, and then on Sunday nights, he would say, "Hey, it's Nick at Night." They're like, oh. It's not even
You're
original.
You're like, come on, man! I'm not a rerun of the Brady Bunch.
Yeah, I was just like, I don't even watch that channel. Yeah, that was pretty annoying.
All right, a nuclear missile has been launched on your position, and there's no chance to run away. How are you going to spend your final moments?
Oh goodness. There's no chance of any salvation?
No.
So I'm gonna die no matter what.
It's a nuclear missile.
Well, yeah, but there's an Iron Giant in this one, and the town gets away. That's what I'm saying. So there is no escape.
There is no escape that you can see.
Man, you hold just like in the movie, you hold the people close to you. I mean, they're obviously not getting away.
Physically close to you, just whoever. Like if it's coming right now, you're gonna like.
I mean,
give me a hug.
If there's nothing else to do, I'm talking about like my family.
Oh, I don't get a hug in this
if my
situation.
family's around.
That's kind of sad.
You have your own family. Go give them a hug. Yeah, you give your family a hug. Man, you went really dark on that one.
Yeah, well, let's end with one that's a little more light. What object do you own that you wish had a soul?
Ooh. What object do I own that I wish had a soul?
What object do you own that you wish had a soul?
That's a hard question, because what would that object do with the soul? Because it could go bad.
It could.
Oh, I guess maybe one of my Star Wars figures, because
that'd be awesome.
Because if like my almost like Indian in the cupboard,
yeah.
Like if my Luke Skywalker, like Jedi Master Luke Skywalker that I had a soul, then I'd have Luke Skywalker with me. And even if he has the Force, he's kind of small. I feel like I could, if he goes bad.
Yeah. Yeah, something small like that. I feel like there are so many things that I have that are, like, whenever I thought of this question, I was like, there's so many things that I have that I like the function that they provide, and I would not want them to be autonomous. Like, I don't want my car or my phone or those things to have autonomy. I want them to do what I want them to do.
Right. It has to be manageable.
Yeah.
Not a giant. Like,
yeah.
You're not going to get away with that very long.
All right, Nick, what do we have to look forward to in the next episode? By the way, this podcast, for those of you listening, we're going to be bi-weekly. So in a couple weeks, you can look forward to hearing our next episode, which is going to be focusing on...
Yeah, the next thing we're tackling is Children of Men. And so we're going to be dropping these on every other Monday. And, 2 weeks apart. So this next episode, we're tackling Children of Men.
Yeah, I actually had not seen it until we decided to do an episode on it. So...
is it on Netflix?
I think I saw it on
or
Amazon Prime.
Yeah, I hadn't seen it in a long time, and I kept going back to those services and being like, is this on anything? Mm-hmm. You can't. It's not in stores. Like, they don't keep it on the rack anywhere that I know of. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I want to watch this movie again. But it's not on anything streaming, and then finally it showed up on Amazon, and I'm like, yes, immediately I'm gonna watch that. And it's a good movie. We've actually had a lot of positive movies so far with this and well,
Moon has a hopeful ending.
It has a hopeful ending.
This definitely has a hopeful ending.
We've been able to talk about some positive things in science fiction, and so this is a dystopian science fiction. Mm-hmm. So we're going to jump into something a bit more dark, not the distant future, but a near future that could possibly happen, and we're going to break down everything it's about. I'm excited for this one. I really like this movie.
Yeah, I was in watching through it, just a kind of casual watch. I definitely enjoyed it. I was sort of surprised that I hadn't seen it, actually, as a result of watching it. I'm like, how did this not like
Well,
come up on my radar? Like how to...
again, like good science fiction, a lot of times it doesn't make the bucks.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times it comes in and out of a theater, and it gets a more of a grassroots love later on. I feel recently we've had some like Arrival and that have actually made a big splash, and I like that too when it's a good concept and it makes a lot of people go and enjoy it and pay for it. Honestly, that they get a return on good material like that. But yeah, often it's people are seeing it, and me too. I'm seeing it way after the fact. I didn't see this in theaters either. Didn't see Moon in theaters because just wasn't around.
Yeah.
It wasn't getting the attention.
Yeah.
So
It's sad that things don't get that attention, but hopefully we are bringing attention to these works, and so
yeah, and it's good that it
people
is
in our audience can jump on board and find
absolutely.
these things too.
It's nice that it is on streaming now. If you have Amazon, and you haven't seen it, hop on there and watch it because it's a great movie. I love when you have access to stuff like this that is harder to get to. I mean, anyone can buy. You can buy the Blu-ray on Amazon, I'm sure, for $10 or so, and there are ways to get it. But it's just nice when it's easily accessible, because then it can reach a wider audience. So yeah, that's what we're tackling next time.
Awesome. Well, listeners, as always, thank you so much for being with us on the Dead Padawan Society. We always appreciate your support and your feedback. So anything that you can say, we would love to hear from you guys. Please like this video and share. Nick wrote that in the script. You just forced me to be that guy on the internet.
Please like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe and ring that bell and do that tap dance.
But honestly, that would be nice.
Well, we do want our audience to be able to get access to our content as easily as possible. And so if you are regularly on YouTube, that's a good way to make sure that you get notified.
Yes. Subscribe. Come talk to us on social media. We'd love to discuss these. We love talking about this stuff. So hit us up on any of our social media accounts, and we'll have the conversation.
You can also send us an email at deadpadawanssociety@gmail.com. It just went Basil Marceau. I'm basilmarceau.com. It's a Dead Padawans Society. And that's one thing to note. There are 2 S's there in the middle. So Padawans Society.
Not singular Padawan.
Not single. Yeah, because there are 2 of us.
Right.
Are we the Dead Padawans?
I'm guessing. Maybe.
All
Padawan,
right.
they all got to die at end of episode 3. They got to die.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thanks again. We'll see you next time.
May the force be with you.
And live long and prosper.